Consider that human beings are the only species of animals that have emotions that define their own experience of themselves. Your relationship to yourself is a unique phenomenon. You see, emotion in the animal world merely characterizes their relationship to the external reality. And they're temporary phenomenon, like when you leave, your dog might display sadness, and when you come back, happiness, but those are temporary. In the human experience, we end up with emotions that continue and often prolonged states of grief and sadness and even depression and other anomalies. But when you think about the fear of rejection, abandonment, or the fear of failure, start to wonder what evolutionary advantages those fears play in the lives of animals. What if an animal attempting to mate wasn't successful and experienced profound rejection and humiliation? So powerful was this emotion that it became hesitant or unwilling to try again. What would that do to the species if all of the animals had this anomaly where they just were unwilling to try to mate because of a fear? What if the fear of failure dominated a species to where when they went hunting to find food for their young cubs, they came back empty-handed, humiliated and ashamed of themselves? They were unwilling to go back out and try again because they, after all, have failed and therefore are a failure. And so what advantage would failure or rejection really play as it pertains to the emotional experiences of animals? How about abandonment? Why would a human being experience abandonment in adulthood? If you look at abandonment anxiety or separation anxiety, we have to consider the role it plays in animals. The role it plays in animals is simply an organizing principle. It causes the young animals to stay within proximity of the caregiver. Animals without the ability to navigate reality by understanding the consequences need powerful emotional drives in order to cause behaviors. Like if the mother bear decides it's time to leave this area, she doesn't get to talk to the little bears and explain it. She's just going to start walking. And so the little bears are going to follow her. And that separation anxiety builds significant levels of anxiety when the baby bears get further away. And so have you ever watched baby bears follow the mother bear across the river? Ever seen that? The mother bear's crossing a creek and you see like the last little baby bear, building up the courage, right? It gets so much anxiety that it has to overcome its fear of the water. But you see, this is a temporary phenomenon, that when the baby bears grow to a certain size, they are going to lose that. And that is going to be when they separate. That is going to be when they move on. But why would a human being retain that? You see, we have to kind of consider, when looking at the roles of emotions in people and animals alike, that animals' emotions can be perfectly explained when observing their behaviors, and you can see that those emotions carry profound levels of accuracy as a necessity. That feeling a sense of rejection would have no benefit, or feeling, like a failure would devastate an entire population, that would be something that would cause the animal to perish, would it not? Well, why don't you look at what human beings are doing? How is our fear of failure working out for us? Do you think that us being driven to try to prove ourselves, to try to become good enough is the universal mechanism of being worthy of a lack of abandonment? And so abandonment anxiety in the form of belonging, in the form of being wanted, in the form of being perceived as successful, avoiding rejection, avoiding being seen as a failure, how is that affecting human beings? How is that affecting our survivability here on the planet? Are there other animals that have similar levels of personal affliction that is compromising the viability of their entire species? With all this intelligence, can you start to see that perhaps things like racism, a fear of another person based on their color? How about the fear of rejection that's driving men to misogyny? That this fear of rejection is projected onto women. And then the man needs an arbitrary outcome to be not rejected, like getting a phone number. And then it becomes an endless vicious cycle to maintain a relationship. How much of your relationships to other people are about overcoming your fear of abandonment, about overcoming your fear of not belonging, overcoming your fear of not being good enough, overcoming your anxieties about being misunderstood? And how much do these concerns impact your interpretation of other people? How often do you find yourself reacting and becoming offended and being so certain that your reaction accurately captures the motives and intentions of other people? How many arguments are due to potentially profound misinterpretations where these anomalous emotions come into existence and dominate you? And when you start to think about a man that is just universally afraid of rejection to all women, how sensitive is that to reality? And how much does that fear of rejection actually cause rejection due to the anxiety of this person, coupled with the inauthentic behaviors and an attachment to your responses that causes them to try to corral you into giving a number, where this person is going to experience profound rejection, profound emotionality that they already had created prior to even talking to you. And it's universal, meaning if it wasn't you, it was another woman, and they would feel the same rejection. And so if you're creating rejection in anticipation and you have not even interacted with this person, how much of that interaction is actually authentic? How much of the conversation between a man fearing rejection and a woman is about the woman, is about her unique perspective or what motivates her? And could you start to see how somebody fearing rejection, fearing failure, fearing not enough might be sensitive to the aspirations of a woman that would make her independent? So if a woman doesn't need this person, it might make them feel abandonment anxiety, that a woman that doesn't need a man, doesn't need to subordinate to a man, has her own money and education, might be perceived as a threat to provoke rejection and abandonment in the man. And so it begs the question, what evolutionary advantage does that fear actually present to humankind? And what are the consequences of the existence of that fear if you look at it from a broad perspective? How much has your fear of being not good enough driven you in your life? And how much fulfillment has it brought you? Have you ever noticed that you keep living into a future and you get there and it doesn't really fix what you were hoping to fix emotionally? And how much of your life is a driven pursuit to a fantasy future where you visualized yourself as perfect, where you've proven yourself so you could overcome your fear of not belonging, your fear of being not good enough? How much of your life do you blame on your past, your trauma that made you feel this way, you think? Or is it possible that you already had this particular emotional experience and it's been replicating everywhere in your life? Look right now. Find me an area of your life where you don't experience being not good enough or experience needing to continue to be good enough. And if you look at an area of your life that is good enough, or that you're good enough within that area, let's just say you're good enough at work. Now, why don't you look from a bigger perspective? Is your work good enough for you? Or is that a comfort zone? Because you're mutually trying to achieve success while avoiding failure, and you've negotiated a comfort zone that is a catch-22, that is automatically going to never provide you with fulfillment. And so as we start to examine the role of emotions in animals and humans alike, we start to see something. And that something is that animals have no emotions of themselves. Well, what is it that made this happen in humans? Why would we be different? What do humans do that animals don't? What do we have that they don't, other than just intelligence? What about words? What about spoken language? How did spoken language impact us? Well, when you think about words as tools of discerning things from other things, and you think about the proliferation of every field of study being a continuous addition of new terms as we parcel out reality, there's one word in the human vocabulary that did the most damage. That word is me. Me invoked a sense of segregation between the experience of oneself and the external experience. The problem with that is the external experience is always an internal experience already. Everything you see is already in your head. And so we created a sense of separation from our awareness of the external world. And so your consciousness moves around within the three-dimensional architecture of a world that you perceive. That's why you have 2 ears and 2 eyes. And so everything you see, everything you hear is already within your mind. And so me caused you to go in, and now you listen to a voice instead of listening to other people. Now your perceptions are, based on your interpretations, and those interpretations are not coming from the moment you live within. If they were, you wouldn't be guilt tripped. If they were, you wouldn't have such profound affliction. So the genesis of me had a particular cognitive effect on humans. The first fight or flight reaction of the human's life, the emotional and the physiological state change caused the child to look within themselves. And all the emotional changes that they observed were attributed to the cause of this reaction when they were actually also the result of the reaction. And so the cause and the result became the same neurological pattern, a paradox of the fight or flight reaction where the something is wrong here that motivates the animal to wake up from a sleep and inspect the external reality, which again is already within the brain of the rabbit. They found a fox and they went into fight or flight. And they patternized the fox that the afferent signals observed the neurological patterns of the fox and stored it, and observed the behavioral responses and stored it. So it sees the fox, and this pattern activates the fight or flight, and then for later recall, the efferent axons would trigger the same neurological domains that generate the same behaviors and emotions. And so the fight or flight mechanism is a fast way to bifurcate the consciousness to create a very rapid response by replicating the neurological activity of the very first experience. And so the very first experience of fight or flight for the human, instead of capturing the outside world, they captured the inside world, where the something's wrong here translated into something is wrong with me. And as the child looked at me, everything they observed caused stimulation and further dissociation into paralyzed confusion, stuckness, because without a behavioral response, because you're not observing anything external, there's nothing to run to, there's nothing to do, it just escalates and induces a profound abandonment, as the safety the child had and with the caregivers was obliterated by fear, and the fear escalated all the way to the maximum, the fear of imminent death. With the fear of imminent death and all the missing emotions, the not good enough was born. Not good enough in the animal fight or flight reaction is what has an animal run from the other animal. The rabbit is not good enough to fight the coyote and runs away. And so the human being, being not good enough, is now trying to figure out what to do. And so during the cool down period from the arbitrary external event that triggered the first fight or flight, the child will vow to become perfect. Perfect was generated because they would do anything to never feel this fear. And the parents and caregivers were entangled within the fight or flight reaction, putting the child on pervasive eggshells. And since this reactions with yourself, you live in pervasive fear of the thoughts of everyone else. You worry about what they're going to say to you. You react to the fight or flight reaction based on the words of others, just the words. Vibrating air molecules on your eardrum will trigger you into trauma. A mechanism that would have a gazelle escape the grip of a lion, lick its wounds, and rejoin the herd and be happy, has you saying that your mommy and daddy traumatized you simply because they didn't give you enough emotional support. I want you to think about that for a second. I want you to think about that for a little more than a second. My book's coming out. I hope you'll find it a good read.